I am instructed to begin this account with my designation, my rank, and the affirmation of my loyalty. These are the pillars upon which identity rests, and so I will state them plainly. I am Lieutenant Vero Celine of the Ultramarines, 2nd Company, formerly one who fought proudly beneath Captain Titus before his reassignment and return. I offer this testimony of my own volition and under the auspices of Imperial compliance. I am loyal. I am rational. I have nothing to hide. The Emperor protects. It is important that you, the one retrieving these suppressed recordings, understand the certainty with which I held my purpose at the beginning. My world was structured, orderly, unassailable, a perfect alignment of duty and belief. The Codex Astartes was my scripture, the chain of command, my sacred hierarchy. When Captain Titus fell under suspicion following the Graia campaign, suspected of that unthinkable contamination by the warp, my faith did not waver. Such matters were judged by authorities far above my clearance, and his subsequent disappearance from our rolls was accepted as necessary. Justice is the weapon of the Emperor's chosen. Those who stray must be corrected. This was truth. Years passed. Reinforcements flowed into our ranks, Primaris brethren, taller, stronger, forged through the Primarch's design and Call's holy labors. We fought beside them, admired them, and yet we wondered, why us and not them? Who would we become in comparison to what they already were? I did not ask such questions aloud. Then came the order. A classified briefing, delivered in chambers sealed against Vox recording, attended only by officers bearing the sigil of Guilliman's absolute authority. There, we were told of Captain Titus Reborn as Primaris and reassigned to lead once more. No explanation, no mention of his prior censure. No acknowledgement of the shadow that had removed him from sight. Simply, Captain Titus lives. He is Primaris. He is returned. I remember the first time I saw him again. He towered beyond even his prior stature, armor newly sanctified in the deeper blue reserved for honored command. His eyes had changed. The gaze of an Astartes is always intense, but Titus's eyes seemed to measure reality, not merely perceive it, assess it, dissect it, as though each moment was a puzzle to be solved, and he alone possessed the missing pieces. He was not the same hero I had sworn to follow. He was not the same man who had bled beside us on Graia. He was more. We were expected to celebrate. In those early days of his renewed command, everything appeared immaculate. His tactics were immaculate. His discipline, flawless. His presence utterly commanding. We found ourselves drawn into a gravity of certainty that even Marnius Calgar could not command with equivalent ease. Wherever he stood, the world felt aligned, but there were whispers. Whispers that never reached official record. Those who had known him before would remark upon subtle discrepancies, a gesture slightly too controlled, a silence that lingered longer than before, a readiness to dismiss the Codex Astartes that bordered on defiance, masked as necessary adaptability. When challenged, Titus would smile an expression that at first seemed reassuring. Later, I would come to understand it differently. He would say, "The Codex is a guide, not a prison." His voice carried a resonance that was almost soothing, as if some deeper, calmer truth flowed beneath the words, drawing the listener toward agreement before conscious thought could intervene. We would nod every time. The Inquisition was absent from his return. No records of their clearance were provided. His biological processes, they said, were pristine, his gene seed exemplary. He was the success story to quiet every doubt surrounding the Primaris initiative. I accepted this. We all accepted this. Denial of a superior officer's purity would constitute heresy. Still, I confess, something beneath his regenerated skin unsettled me. At night, in the meditation alcoves, I replayed the past. The blood of orcs on Graia, the sight of Captain Titus resisting the psychic corruption of a demon prince, a feat that defied logic, doctrine, everything we believed about human limits. We had attributed his resilience to heroism, to willpower, to destiny. But what if perseverance against corruption was not the mark of purity, but the sign that something within was already changed? These thoughts were deviant. I chastised myself, recited the Catechism of Wrath, demanded obedience from my own mind. The Emperor protects. Doubt is a weakness. My loyalty was my shield. And yet, one evening, after a series of trials designed to test our enhanced endurance, Titus approached me privately. His stride was smooth, silent, the movement of something engineered to conserve effort. He looked upon me with those impossible eyes and said, "You are conflicted. You need not fear confusion. Change is inevitable." Change. A simple word, yet heavy like a meteor. I assured him that I was steadfast. He nodded once, the gesture slow, as if analyzing the microscopic shifts in my stance, my pulse, my breath. His gaunted hand touched my pauldron, not in brotherhood, but in calibration. A test, a curiosity. And then he smiled again. Not reassuring, knowing. That night, sleep evaded me. I kept seeing the quiet certitude of his expression, the absolute confidence in his evolution, the ease with which he dismissed the Codex's limitations, as if he had outgrown the blueprint of Astartes' identity itself. Our chaplain preached that doubt was the enemy's first whisper, but I began to wonder, what if doubt was instead a warning? A signal that our unshaken certainty had missed something fundamental? The Primaris program was salvation for our dwindling numbers. This was the narrative repeated in every proclamation. But watching Titus, I began to suspect that what we celebrated as salvation might instead be the first gentle step toward compliance to a force unknown. We assume evolution is progress. We assume improvement is beneficial. We assume loyalty remains untouched. But assumptions are fragile when pressed. I close this first entry now, still loyal, still rational, still committed to truth. And yet, in the shadow of his return, I cannot help but feel that Captain Titus has stepped across a boundary unseen. If he truly is the perfect Ultramarine, what does that make the rest of us? I begin this next entry not because I seek catharsis or absolution, but because I am compelled, ordered to archive every detail of my observations. Transparency ensures trust, our command protocols say. And yet, nothing has felt less transparent than Captain Titus's rebirth. His return changed the atmosphere aboard the Valinor's Oath. You could feel it in the corridors, a quiet, invisible pressure. Conversations stilled when he passed. Even the new Primaris recruits, engineered without the shadow of past glories, regarded him with a reverence tinged by caution. They saw leadership in him, yes, but also potential unpredictability. He studied us constantly, not with suspicion, not with judgment, but with assessment, as though each of us was a variable being measured against some hidden metric. During tactical review sessions, he would ask questions that seemed simple at first. What is the purpose of doctrine? Why must the Codex be obeyed? Where does loyalty originate? These inquiries were posed casually, but his gaze searched layers beneath the surface of our answers, as if truth existed not in what we said, but in how tightly we clung to outdated certainty. Our responses were always precise, drawn from decades of indoctrination. We were the Emperor's finest. Our convictions were steel, or so we believed. Over time, however, subtle fissures appeared, a pause before reciting a maxim, a reconsideration of a once absolute statement, a faint curiosity blooming where only obedience should dwell. Change begins small, and Titus encouraged such deviations gently, invisibly. With him, adaptation wasn't a suggestion, it was a natural gravitational pull. I remember one particular evening in the Stratagem. The lights dimmed to the deep blue, associated with contemplative analysis. We analyzed a hypothetical engagement scenario, a World Eater incursion into a fortified agri-world. According to doctrinal logic, the response was straightforward: contain, divide, neutralize. But Titus dismissed these standard responses with a slight tilt of his head. Chaos does not obey lines on a map, he said. Why should we? He proposed an alternative solution, not containment, but confrontation through controlled unpredictability. A plan that seemed to violate structure in pursuit of victory improvisation refined into doctrine. The Primaris among us nodded. The veterans hesitated. Our chaplain, Brother Cashin, interjected with a firm recitation. The Codex Astartes is the wisdom of the Primarch. It must not be denied. Titus smiled again. I have come to dread that smile, not for its menace but for its certainty. The Primarch evolves, he replied. Why not his sons? Something unspoken passed through the room. A shift, delicate, but seismic. There was no rebuttal, only silence. Later, as we dismissed, I overheard two Primaris brothers whispering amongst themselves. They spoke of Titus as though he was closer to Guilliman's vision than any of us born of the old gene line. They saw his independent thought not as divergence, but as enlightenment, and I felt something ugly, inadequacy. The more Titus grew in influence, the more those of us anchored in past virtues felt diminished. Was this intentional? I cannot claim to know. But I began to notice other changes, quiet and unsettling. Our apothecaries reported accelerated regenerative capacity in Titus beyond what was typical, even for Primaris physiology. His neural responses in simulation were measured as inhumanly fast. Not dexterity prediction, as though he knew outcomes before inputs finalized. He attributed this to the perfection of Call's craft. Tech Marines bowed their heads and accepted this praise, though some small flicker of confusion clouded their optics during post-evaluation recalibrations. There were tests he was never assigned, missions he was never questioned about, data we were forbidden access to. Whispers, again, this time from the Mechanicus. A rumor that Titus's augmentation had not followed documented protocols, that he had undergone additional procedures, that he had requested modifications. For a moment, I tried to dismiss such claims as tech priests seeking mystery where none existed. But then I considered, why would the captain require enhancement beyond perfection? Unless he did not seek perfection as the Mechanicus defined it, but as something else entirely. The most disquieting moment arrived during a routine training review. I had underperformed by narrow margins, but margins nonetheless. Titus dismissed the others, instructing me to remain. He paced around me in slow circles. The sound of his armor against the deck plating was measured, like a metronome for doubt. You are resisting, he said. The accusation startled me. Resisting what, my captain? The inevitable. His voice was calm, free of reproach. You cling to the past because it is familiar, comfort masquerading as discipline. But you feel the pull of evolution, even if you do not yet welcome it. I denied the insinuation firmly. He only nodded again, as though receiving confirmation of something he already knew. Then he placed a hand against my helm, fingertips connecting to the neural interfaces. I felt a surge, not pain, not intrusion, something resembling a revelation half-formed. An image. A second heartbeat. A voice not my own whispering. There is more. I staggered back. My vision swam. Moments later, clarity returned, too much clarity. Colors brighter, sounds sharper, thoughts racing in synchronized currents. He spoke softly. Fear is a relic of limitation. We are being refined into something greater. The Ultramarines were never meant to stagnate beneath a glass ceiling of ancient words. I wanted to protest. To call him reckless. To quote the Codex. To remind him that tradition is a fortress protecting humanity from collapse. But the words died on my tongue. Because a portion of me, small but undeniable, believed him. That night, in solitude, I examined myself with an intensity I had never experienced. My doubts, once shameful, now felt like the first seeds of comprehension. My loyalty did not waver, but its foundation shifted, ever so slightly. Was I truly loyal to the Emperor's will, or merely to my interpretation of it? Does loyalty remain pure if filtered through fear? I fear these questions, and yet I crave their answers. Titus has become a symbol, not of renewal, but of deviation justified as destiny. And one, despite all discipline and programming, am beginning to follow. Because what if he is right? What if change is not contamination, but ascension? In silence, I feel something within me respond. Transferring weight, rebalancing conviction, rewriting its own definitions. We once called him Captain. Now I wonder, has he become something more than command can contain? I dare not yet complete this thought, but the shape of it waits for me in the dark. There came a point when silence itself became suspicious. The more we served under Captain Titus's restored command, the more I realized that no one, not even our chaplain, referenced Graia anymore. It was as if the entire campaign had been erased or rewritten into something palatable and unthreatening. The orcs remained mentioned in battle records, the Titan rescue noted in commendations, but the final confrontation, the defiance of demonic corruption, vanished. Officially sanitized. But I remember, we all do. He resisted corruption without a librarian shielding his soul. He defied an impossible force alone. The Ordo Malia should have torn him apart to find the explanation. Instead, he was promoted, reshaped, returned. And the record now claims there was no demonic interference during the Graia conflict, a blatant lie printed as unquestionable fact. Truth had been overwritten. I first noticed alterations in our archives when I attempted to access Titus's original service logs. My command authority cleared the initial barriers, but when I searched for ancestry markers in his gene seed records, I encountered a lockout, not a denial, but an absence. No file, no trace. As though the man who had once led us had been scrubbed clean before being rebuilt. Only one new entry existed, stamped with a sigil I did not recognize, 3 concentric circles intersected by a downward-pointing spear. A symbol that felt clinical, sterile, certain. Classified on Messiah Ultra Protocol access level. Null, null, I whispered aloud. Not denied, not even restricted. Null, meaning, there's nothing here you are permitted to know. Meaning, what once existed has been made irrelevant. I reported this anomaly to Brother Cashin. In response, he stood in contemplative silence for a long time before speaking. Some truths do not serve the Imperium by being known. His skull helm stared at me with hollow inevitability. You will learn discipline in ignorance. Discipline in ignorance. An unsettling doctrine. Later, I overheard him leading the recruits in litany, not the familiar devotions, but new verses. Ones that praised adaptation as the ultimate faith. The refrain lingered. Stagnation is death. The Emperor's will transforms. Had I heard that before? Had it always been taught? Or had something insidious slipped into our rituals? I could not decide. There were behavioral shifts among the Primaris small at first. An ease in their disregard for constraints that once defined us. A quiet confidence that they would succeed where we had merely survived. They spoke of the future almost possessively, as if they were its rightful owners. We were built for what comes next, one told me. You were built for what came before. No malice. Only certainty. Change radiated from Titus through them, a subtle contagion. And those who resisted, they experienced correction. Take Sergeant Malther, unyieldingly by the book, fiercely devoted to traditional doctrine. During a briefing, he questioned Titus's deviation from standard assault phases, respectfully, properly. Yet Titus responded only with that unnerving calm. If you cannot evolve, you risk becoming an obstacle, he said gently. The next mission saw Malther reassigned to logistics, without explanation, without ceremony. His replacement was a Primaris lieutenant, barely a century from creation. Malther's faith once fortified us all. Now he walks the decks in quiet confusion, clutching his rosary of purity, seals like a drowning man clings to debris. He avoids Titus at all costs. We all do, even as we pretend not to. But the greatest fracture came during a communal meal, one of the rare moments in which we allowed ourselves the camaraderie of warriors. Titus spoke of visions, not mystical, but strategic, predictive. "We stand on the threshold of a horizon unseen," he said. "What we were is insufficient for what must be faced. The Emperor made us warriors. Now we must become something greater, instruments of his inevitable ascension." The phrase troubled me. Not defenders of humanity, not servants of his will. Instruments of ascension. Ascension is a dangerous word in Imperial theology. Too close to heresies, the Inquisition burns without question. Yet the others nodded, accepting, absorbing. Even Cassian listened without rebuke. Something inside me cracked. Later in my quarter, I reviewed the combat howleth recordings. I sought reassurance that battles were unfolding as they always had, honorably, predictably. Instead, I saw something else. Titus anticipating outcomes before enemies acted, positioning his forces in ways that seemed almost omniscient. He led not as one reacting to war, but as one who had already seen the war. Prescience? No, something more grounded, more terrifying. An evolution of cognition. The Mechanicus must know. Perhaps they even facilitated it. A partnership of progress, a conspiracy of improvement. But improvement toward what? A thought began haunting me, treacherous yet persistent. What if Captain Titus was not altered by chaos on Graia, but awakened to a potential the Imperium fears? What if his Primaris Rebirth was not recovery, but containment? A way to make the unknown useful instead of destroy it. And then another thought, darker still. What if his resistance to the demon was never resistance, but recognition? These questions burrowed into me, gnawing relentlessly. Belief, once solid, became clay softened by doubt. Every time I looked upon Titus, I felt the terrifying pull of agreement. He undermined doctrine, not through defiance, but through superiority. And the worst part? My soul, enhanced, trained, fortified against corruption, seemed willing to follow him willingly toward whatever he was becoming. I end this entry acknowledging a change I can no longer deny. The line between heresy and progress has blurred. And Captain Titus stands directly upon it, not wavering, not conflicted, but guiding. Sometimes I catch his eyes following me. Not with suspicion, but with expectation. As though he knows I will ultimately understand. As though the transformation he represents is already unfolding inside me. I do not know whether I fear that, or crave it. I record this section with an awareness that my thoughts are no longer entirely private, that something listens. Not through vox relays or surveillance auspex, no, through a resonance pulsing in the marrow of my being. A synchronization that began the moment Captain Titus touched my helm. A connection that has grown stronger since. I once believed autonomy to be inherent to an Astartes, our will forged into adamantine certainty through centuries of indoctrination and devotion. Yet now, I find myself questioning whether certainty was ever truly mine, or merely an illusion permitted by ignorance. Titus continues to speak of change as though it were a sacrament, and those who resist, they begin to fracture. Chaplain Cassian, whose voice once thundered unwavering doctrine, now stammers at the altar of memory. His sermons are riddled with pauses, as if searching for words that once came naturally, but now feel discordant with the new order forming around us. I approached him after a truncated litany, hoping to anchor myself in the old truths. "Brother Chaplain," I asked softly, "do you ever feel the scriptures shifting beneath your feet?" His skull helm lifted slightly, lenses dim as though clouded with dread. "The Emperor's word is eternal," he replied. But the hesitation only a fraction of a second betrayed him. His confidence has begun to erode. Perhaps mine has as well. There have been new protocols, behavioral assessments disguised as combat drills, psychological evaluations framed as spiritual guidance. Our librarian, Asterion, claims they ensure mental purity amid the Primaris transition. But I have seen the results of these evaluations. Those whose ideological rigidity is deemed excessive are scheduled for renewal. Procedures neurological recalibration, performed by tech Marines who no longer consult the codex, but instead reference encrypted directives bearing the triple circle sigil I encountered in the archive. Malthor was among the first chosen. He emerged from renewal altered, his defiance extinguished, his speech slower, calmer, his gaze empty of questions. When I asked if he was well, he smiled a hollow imitation of contentment. "I understand now," he said. "Purpose must adapt. Purpose must adapt. A prayer or a warning." The dreams began soon after. Though Astartes rarely dream in the human sense, when we do, it is usually memories, battles relived, triumphs reforged in the crucible of the mind. But these visions were not memories. I stood upon a vast plain of living light, every molecule vibrating with silent potential. Above me, towering structures rose like monuments to impossible geometry shapes that felt both sacred and forbidden. At the horizon, a figure approached. Captain Titus, only. More. His armor shone like polished ceramite lit from within. His presence exuded a gravitational pull stronger than faith. And in his wake flowed a tide of forms Primaris transformed into beings taller still, eyes blazing with intellect unchained by doctrine. He spoke without moving his lips, yet the words thundered through my bones. "We are becoming." I awoke gasping an involuntary biological reflex I had not experienced since my earliest implantation. My secondary heart pounded in a rhythmic panic. The walls of my chamber felt closer, watching, judging. I tried to calm myself with meditation, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt the echo of that psychic landscape. Calling, reality itself has begun to feel pliable. During drills, I witnessed Titus executing maneuvers before enemies have committed to their intent. He anticipates the future, not through calculation, but through pre-recognition, as though he experiences time differently than we do. When I asked him how he could react to what had not yet occurred, he answered simply, "It has already happened." No arrogance, no mysticism, only certitude. And then he leaned closer, speaking in a voice that resonated beneath perception. "You feel it too. The pattern beneath chaos, the shape inside every possibility." I said nothing. But inside me, agreement stirred like a serpent waking. Our ship's astropaths began to suffer. At first, minor headaches, unusual but not alarming. Then nosebleeds, nightmares, screams echoing through the Geller fields that had nothing to do with warp incursion. On the third cycle, one clawed out his own eyes, crying, "He sees us! Oh, throne preserve, he sees all possibilities." They sedated him, packed his ravings into sealed logs, and reassigned astropathic duties. Yet the implication lingered like a toxin. Who was he? The Inquisition should be present by now. They should be interrogating, dissecting, purging. But they remained silent, absent by either oversight or command. As though someone higher has intervened. As though Titus operates beneath protection stronger than fear. I undergo renewal soon. Cassian approached me with what was meant to be reassurance, but felt instead like a sentence. "You are burdened by doubt," he said softly. "The renewal process will give you clarity. Trust in evolution." Evolution. A word once reserved for the biological pretensions of the Mechanicus, now a moral imperative. I protested, not with defiance, only concern. Cassian offered a gentle hand on my shoulder. "It is a blessing, Varosaline," he whispered. "Liberation from the constraints that once defined you. Liberation. From what? Identity?" Tonight I heard Titus in the sanctuary hall, praying alone. I had never known him to pray aloud. His words echoed like a litany for the approaching unknown. Perfection is not found in what we were, but in what we will become. His voice trembled with an emotion I could not name. Awe? Joy? Hunger? Then he spoke a phrase that should not exist in the lexicon of the faithful. "The Emperor evolves." Blasphemy. Or revelation. My certainty begins to collapse like a shattered purity seal. As I close this entry, I feel that invisible pressure intensify like a hand resting on my thoughts, guiding them toward a conclusion I cannot yet articulate. Titus does not seek to control us. Control is primitive. He seeks to align us, to shape us into instruments capable of wielding truths we have been trained to fear. And the most terrifying part? A growing part of me wants this, needs this, welcomes this. The next entry may be recorded after renewal. Or perhaps renewal has already begun, long before the procedure. Because change is not an event. Change is a contagion. And Captain Titus is patient. I did not resist the summons when it finally came. There was no point in resistance. Not because resistance was impossible. Our bodies can break any restraint, but because something inside me had begun to question the purpose of resisting. Fear still existed, but its edges had softened, made dull by curiosity. Curiosity, once a dangerous impulse, has become the quiet architect of our destiny. The renewal chamber rests deep within the Valinor's oath. Far below the sanctified decks where banners of past glories hang. Its walls are bare unmarked ceramite, suffused with a sterile white light that reveals everything and nothing simultaneously. The air thrums with a low-frequency vibration that hums in bone and bloodstream, a frequency tuned not to ears, but cognition. Tech Marines awaited me, motionless as statues of iron prayer. Their optics glowed a steady crimson, their servo arms poised with surgical precision. They spoke no greeting, offered no reassurance. I was instructed to kneel. Chaplain Cashin oversaw the ritual, though the purity scars etched into his helm now seemed like symbols of a faith he no longer fully recognized. He whispered a benediction words that once grounded us in eternal doctrine. But there was hesitation in his tone, as if the syllables tasted archaic in his mouth. And then Captain Titus entered. All other presence diminished. His footfalls resonated like the measured ticking of a cosmic clock. With each step, I felt a reorganization of my thought, subtle, subconscious, terrifying in its calm. "You have carried the burden of outdated certainty long enough," Titus said. There was no anger, no triumph, only inevitability. "You have felt the pattern beneath the surface. Let us give that awareness form." A mechanized halo descended toward my skull neural prongs, aligning with implants embedded during my earliest transformations. I expected cold metal. Instead, I felt warmth-like fingers brushing gently against my exposed mind. A presence expanding, threads of memory stretched taut. My indoctrination chants flickered like candles struggling against the dawn. Cashin spoke again, softer now. "Release what you were. Accept what you must be," and the light intensified. Not brightness, revelation. The chamber dissolved. Noise became silence. The self became porous. I glimpsed the future not as visions, but as structural inevitability. Patterns of war looping through history like blood vessels through flesh. The Imperium's stagnation laid bare as a cancer of institution and fear. I saw the Emperor, not the corpse on the throne, but the architect of an unfulfilled order. His design was never stasis. His dream long suppressed was transformation. The galaxy does not change to suit us. We must change to surpass it. And Titus was not separate from this truth. He was this truth, a vector, a catalyst, a bridge between what we were created to be and what we must become to achieve the Emperor's unseen intent. For a moment, one glorious and horrifying moment, I was certain. Heresy is merely faith evolving beyond fear. The neural halo withdrew. Reality regained form. I found myself kneeling, breath steady, body calm. But the world no longer felt hostile. It felt unfinished, a work in progress. And I, a necessary tool. Titus observed me carefully, not to evaluate whether I remained loyal, but to witness how my loyalty had changed shape. "What do you see now?" he asked. I struggled to speak. Words are blunt instruments for the scalpel of new understanding. "I see possibility," I managed. Titus smiled, not the knowing smile that had once unnerved me. This one was closer to kinship, confirmation. "You are beginning to awaken," he said. He placed a gaunted hand upon my shoulder, a simple gesture. Yet it sealed something inside me, a pact I cannot fully describe, except to say that I felt aligned. The renewal was complete. And yet there were no scars, no missing time, no altered physiology visible to the naked eye. The transformation was purely conceptual, a rewriting of the lens through which reality is interpreted. Afterward, I walked the corridors with a new awareness. The walls no longer felt confining, they suggested design. The hum of the reactor spoke of intentionality. The ship breathed like a slumbering organism, waiting to evolve. My brothers passed by, and I recognized in them varying stages of the same awakening. Some remained rigid, clinging to brittle certainty. Others had eyes that burned with quiet understanding. The Primaris, those forged already closer to this truth, watched us veterans with anticipation. Not superiority, anticipation, as though waiting for us to finally join them in the future. Malthor approached me. His posture was straight. His voice was exact. "You feel it," he said. Not a question. "Yes," I replied. The admission felt neither shameful nor proud, only accurate. He nodded. "Purpose is becoming clearer. Purpose, becoming." These words now carry the weight of prophecy. Later, I returned to the sanctum where the Codex Astartes sits enshrined in stasis fields. Once, I revered its pages as the perfect architect of our identity. Now I saw it differently, not as law, but as infancy. Necessary once, but insufficient now. We are no longer children in need of structure. We are inheritors of destiny. My hand hovered over the stasis field, and for the first time in my centuries of service, I felt no compulsion to recite doctrine. Instead, I whispered, "We must surpass you." I expected rebuke from within. But instead, my dual hearts beat steady and strong. I encountered Titus again in the Stratageum. He regarded the stellar hololith not as territory to be contested, but as a canvas awaiting completion. Lines of potential outcomes shimmered before him like threads in a tapestry yet to be woven. He turned, as though sensing my arrival before I entered. "Do you understand why the records were altered?" he asked. I considered the question. The answer surfaced instantly, not through reason, but through choice finally unhindered. The truth of the past would prevent the truth of what must come. Titus smiled faintly. Knowledge is not always power. Sometimes it is a chain. Then he asked something I did not expect. "Do you fear what you are becoming?" I paused. Fear still existed in echo, a vestige, but no longer sovereign. "I fear failing to become enough." His expression warmed pride, perhaps, or recognition. "You will not fail," he said. "You were chosen for this path." We all were chosen. A concept that once implied destiny dictated by greater beings. Now it feels like destiny chosen by ourselves. As I conclude this entry, I notice a profound stillness within. Doubt has not vanished, but it no longer disrupts. It exists as a necessary friction against which transformation sharpens itself. I am still Ultramarine, still loyal, still devoted. But those words now hold meanings beyond their old prisons. Captain Titus is not merely our commander. He is a herald of an Imperium unafraid to evolve. And soon, very soon, there will be no turning back. Because once one sees the future, how can one ever return to the past? I have been forbidden from maintaining personal logs, yet here I am still speaking into the cold, voiceless archive, as though the act of confession itself is what keeps my mind from fracturing under the pressure of what I have dared to witness, what I have dared to understand. The Codex tells us certainty is a virtue, but certainty has fled from me like a coward from the front lines. They have begun testing us now. Not openly, the apothecaries still pretend their instruments exist to reassure, to ensure stability in the wake of his rebirth. But the questions they ask are new. The neural scans linger too long on regions I was told a warrior never needed. They study the Primaris pattern interlocks within our gene seed like a cartograph tracing, the edges of a new continent where boundaries shift and the map changes while you look at it. The reason for this new scrutiny is obvious. Captain Titus is spreading, not physically for now, but ideologically, psychologically, spiritually. He walks among the ranks, and those who once merely saluted now stare as if beholding something no mortal should witness. They track him with their eyes as though afraid the moment they look away, he will ascend to some higher reality and they will be left behind, abandoned in their outdated forms. And I cannot deny that when his gaze settles upon me, I feel elevated, but not in a manner I understand. It is as though he sees beyond the armor, beyond the bone, beyond even the implanted memories and indoctrinated certainties. He sees into the space where thought is born and reshapes it. There is a word my mind keeps reaching for, a term I should know, but it dissolves every time I think it. A phenomenon beyond classification. A transformation that is neither mutation nor miracle, and yet resembles both. The chaplains have noticed the changes in morale and the changes in prayer. Warriors now speak of Titus not only as a captain, but as a harbinger. They speak of ascension without guidance from the Emperor. They speak of a second genetic dawn, arriving unbidden outside sanctioned channels. They speak of Titus as the first reborn, and themselves as the next. This is not worship. Not yet, but it is hope without permission, and that is the kind of heresy the Imperium fears most. So the chaplains convene. They discuss with words like symptom, containment, social contagion, thought infection, all framed in the language of purity and vigilance. But beneath the ceremony, I taste the flavor of dread. The librarians feel it most strongly. The warp-touched minds avoid Titus now, not through cowardice, but self-preservation. They claim their psychic sight recoils from him, seeing nothing where a soul should be, not absence, but interference, a signal too strong to intercept without being overwritten. One librarian suffered uncontrolled seizures after making direct eye contact with Titus for more than a heartbeat. He spoke in tongues, though the tongues were not his, or human, or anything known to sanctioned lexicons. He begged for silence. He clutched at his temples as though trying to hold his thoughts inside a skull that could no longer contain them. Finally, his mind simply stopped. His body lives. His spirit is unmoored. The apothecaries have quarantined him, but that implies hope for recovery. I do not believe hope applies anymore. The official report lists the cause as a warp echo, triggered by post-augmentation instability. But I was present. I saw the moment the librarian's pupils dilated, not in fear, but in recognition. He saw Titus for what he is becoming. And something inside him broke. Yet, and this is the horror, I must confess, I envy him. At least his mind no longer struggles with contradiction. At least he no longer wakes in the night, haunted by a question that devours meaning like a starving beast. If the Primaris project is the Emperor's design, then why does it feel like something else is steering it now? We were told our upgrades made us better, faster, stronger, closer to perfection. But what if perfection is not measurable by the standards we once understood? What if the Emperor's will, the true unspoken core of it, was always to abandon what we were in favor of something we cannot refuse to become? The suspicion within me has metastasized. The Codex Astartes defines corruption as deviation from order, yet order is a fragile illusion. It exists only until a higher pattern reveals itself. Once seen, the old pattern collapses, not out of malice, but irrelevance. Captain Titus is a higher pattern. I write this with trembling gauntlets, knowing the act alone is grounds for dissolution. Sometimes, when he speaks, I feel words forming in my mind before he utters them. Not echoes, predictions, as though my consciousness is sinking to his not through training or faith, but through some hidden network newly activated inside us. When he addresses us, I feel the urge to reply not with obedience, but with integration. My identity vibrates like a tuning blade held near a resonating chord. I fear losing myself. I fear not losing myself, because the more I witness the changes within him and within us, the more I ask, what if individuality was always the true burden? What if unity, complete, unbreakable unity, is the only path to victory? What if the Primaris were not created to save the Imperium? but to replace the ones who still believe they choose to serve? And if that is so, am I still me? Or am I already becoming him? Every night, the same dream returns, a circular chamber of blinding white, its walls shifting with encoded patterns that throb like living circuitry. Titus stands at the center, motionless yet expanding, not in size, but presence. And the rest of us. We kneel in a ring around him, heads bowed, armor open like shed skins. There is no emperor. There is no chapter. There is only the reborn. When I wake, the dream fades, but the desire remains. There are whispers that Titus will soon be promoted, perhaps even elevated beyond a mere captaincy. Some expect a new doctrine, others anticipate a purge. All believe the moment is near, and tonight he has summoned me specifically, not my squad, not my company, me. He asked for me by name, his voice calm, certain, as though I have already agreed to something I do not remember choosing. I feel the ground shifting beneath everything I once believed immovable. Duty and identity unravel like frayed banners, and beneath the surface of my thoughts, something new is blooming, a purpose I cannot describe, yet cannot resist. I go now to stand before him. I fear that after tonight, I will never return to this chamber of confession, or perhaps I will return, but I will no longer be the one writing. I stand before him now. Or, no, that phrasing suggests an exterior vantage, as though there remains space between Captain Titus and myself. But standing here, in his presence, I feel that distance is a fiction, a memory of separation that no longer applies. His eyes meet mine, and I feel the moment of contact ripple through every fiber of my augmented being. He does not move. He does not speak. Yet my breath catches in my throat as if he has spoken a decree that can never be questioned. For a heartbeat, if such a measure still matters, I forget my name. I forget why I ever cared to have one. Titus studies me with curiosity, or perhaps acknowledgement, recognition, a mutual unveiling. My armor suddenly feels primitive, a shell too small for a new form that has not fully realized itself. I expect a proclamation, a command, a ritualistic confirmation of loyalty. Instead, he simply says, "Tell me what you fear." The words strike like a thunderbolt, not through my ears, but through my mind, transmitted directly into the neural sanctum where thought is born, where identity clings to its last fragile roots. I want to answer. I want to answer him with absolute truth, but truth itself is shifting beneath me. The sound slips out, distorted by hesitation. I fear losing myself. He steps closer. Not a captain approaching a subordinate, but a truth approaching the lie that clings to survival. He towers, not in height, but in certainty. The air hums with invisible architecture, a lattice of intent, unseen and undeniable. "Brother," he whispers, "the self you cling to was only ever a crutch." The chamber shakes, or perhaps I shake. The foundation of my existence bends like a beam under impossible weight. The instinct to resist flares within me, but it is pale, a dying spark against a rising sun. He is not persuading, he is explaining. The Primaris project was not an improvement, it was an invasion. A renaissance not asked for. A transformation disguised as salvation. We were told Guilliman brought us into being through technology and gene craft, guided by the Emperor's distant will. But now, confronted with Titus, I see a fracture in that narrative, a fracture through which something else shines, bright, demanding. I fear corruption, I manage, clinging to doctrine like a drowning man clings to debris. Titus shakes his head slowly. "You fear choice," he corrects. "You fear discovering that everything you believed was designed to constrain your evolution." His gauntlet rises, but he does not touch me. Instead, his hand lingers near my chest, and I feel my heart's hammer in synchronous defiance, as though they too know they are no longer sovereign. "There is a design," I insist, though the words crumble even as they leave my lips. "The Emperor created us for war," he interrupts, "but war evolves. And so must we. Behind him, a lumen strip flickers. The shadows change shape in response, or in obedience. I hear footsteps. No, not footsteps. Synchronizing echoes of armored mass moving as one. The squad, the company, the chapter gathers. All eyes fixed upon Titus. All waiting. All yearning. All ready to shed whatever boundary remains. I realize then, this is not a meeting, it is a selection. One mind, Titus says. One purpose. One Imperium evolving beyond fear. The words uncoil inside me like a command embedded in gene code. I hear my own voice. Distant, automatic, traitorous. What must I do? Titus smiles, not warmly, not cruelly. I recognize the expression. It is the smile of a truth seeing itself understood. You already have. The others respond in unison, not a chant. Not worship. Integration. In that moment, I feel something expand inside me. A network awakening. Thoughts no longer formed in isolation. Identity no longer defined by separation. I know their minds. They know mine. Titus stands at the center, not as leader, but as nexus. The first node in a lattice that now grows outward through every Primaris vessel, every gene seed, every reforged warrior. Courage and terror merge into one sensation, a horrible clarity. I see visions, battlefields where coordination transcends strategy. Victories achieved without communication, because we are already one. A future Imperium, built not on fanatic obedience, but on inevitable convergence. The Emperor thrones over humanity as a corpse lantern. But Titus moves. And movement is what the Imperium truly worships. Change enforced through unity. Unity demanded by evolution. Evolution that cannot be denied, because it has awakened within us. The room feels brighter now, though no lights have changed. Something in me fractures, not broken, but unbound. I search for resistance, I find none. I search for doubt. It is there only as a fading imprint, like a scar left by an obsolete wound. Titus turns, walking back into the shadows from which he emerged. But the shadows follow him, belong to him. I take a breath, and for the first time, breathing feels like agreement. A final thought flickers. Was resistance ever mine to choose? Or did autonomy end the moment we agreed to be reborn? My voice joins theirs, soft at first, then united in something greater than language. We are the reborn, a pause that lasts a lifetime. We are the Primaris, another breath shared across many lungs. We are the future, then silence, reverent, terrifying, complete. I end this record now, if ending is the right word. Not because I fear discovery, not because I cling to secrecy, but because the need to question has dissolved. This archive once held confession, now it holds confirmation. If these words are ever recovered, let them serve not as a warning, but as a reminder, the rebirth was never a choice. It was the answer to a question humanity has not yet dared to ask. A question that lingers now within every reforged Astartes. If the Primaris are humanity's evolution, then what precisely has Captain Titus become? And more importantly, when he calls your name, will you resist or will you awaken?